What is up, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Dwayne and I'm here today with Vape and Juice, and today we're going to be covering AWG, American Wire Gauge. How does that affect your vaping experience? We're going to cover that in today's video. So how does this affect your vaping experience? The thicker the wire gauge pretty much means that you're going to be using more wire. So when I say the thicker your wire gauge, how gauge works is the lower the number of gauge, so say like you have 20 gauge, 22 gauge, it's going to be much thicker than say you have 24 gauge, 26 gauge. So the higher the number, the thinner the wire gets. So if you get 40 gauge, it's going to be like a strand of hair. Then you get 20 gauge, it's going to be like a metal pole almost. It's pretty thick, and it's very easy if you're just getting into coil building. So like when I started personally 3 years ago, it was 24 gauge. It's the perfect sweet spot. So when you're trying to wrap the coils and everything, which we're going to cover in another video, stay tuned for that. What it does is, because it gives, like, it isn't super flimsy like this 28 gauges. Like, as you can see, it's very flimsy, really hard. So say when you're wrapping it around a screwdriver, it can like spring out a bit and it's really hard to get tight. So I'll recommend starting on like 26, 24 gauge. I personally started on 24. I find it like the best sweet spot pretty much to start at if you're just getting into it. It's very easy to hold, it holds form really well, it's really easy to just work with in general. So what are the main differences apart from the ohms and everything? So 24 gauge, 26 gauge is thicker, it ramps up nicely, you know, you don't really need to worry about your ohms too much as working with thinner wire, unless you're using a very thick wire. The thick wire, pretty much, you're going to have really low ohms. Stay tuned, I'm going to cover the ohm law and everything in another video where we get really into details with it, but I'll keep it as novice friendly as well. So like, because when I first started, it was like a foreign language to me. Eventually I learned it, but I'm going to break it down into everything. So like we can start off nice and slow, introducing it, and then I'll start getting into like the more in-depth parts of it. It's pretty easy. It's going to take you about a week or so, but once you get it down, it's easy. So 24 gauge, I would recommend you start with. The main differences are, you know, the ohmage. So yeah, the main differences here are going to be the ohms. A sweet spot for your ohmage when I first started building was about 0.2, 0.3 ohms, but it does depend what you're building it on. So whatever device you're using, look up into like the user manual, see what is like the sweet spot. See what coils you're currently using in your tank. Try and build to something like that. Again, I said the more amount of wire, so the more wire you're using, the lower the ohms, but that doesn't take into account the amount of wraps. So if you're using more wraps, you're going to get higher ohms. If you're using less wraps, you're using pretty much, you're going to have lower ohms. So how that works is, because you know the electricity doesn't have to flow as much. So I'll be covering that in another video as well. But say like I have 5 wraps around a screwdriver, say like that is like 0.2 ohms. If I put 7 wraps, it's going to be like 0.2 something. So it will go up. It might even be 0.3 depending on the wire gauge that I'm using. But ladies and gentlemen, that is pretty much the differences between gauge wires. You have thinner, thicker. If you're starting out, I would recommend starting on like 24 gauge. Then, you know, go up to 26. 28 might be a bit too thin for you. It is pretty thin wire. But yeah, 24, even 22. Just stay around 22, 24, maybe 26, and best of luck building.